No matter where you are in life, State Farm can help. From protecting your car and home to helping you provide for college and retirement. Find your agent at statefarm.com. Welcome back into Drennan Live here on Sportstime Ohio, and the NFL season quickly approaching, just a little over a week away, and that means fantasy football is quickly approaching as well. And joining me now is Ryan Fowler of FoxSports.com, our fantasy football expert, and there is a lot to talk about. We only have a little bit over a week now to figure all the logistics out with you, and there has been so many injuries that we can talk about. And I know people have had their drafts. There's still some coming. But the impact of Tony Romo and Teddy Bridgewater being injured.
Yeah, we'll start with Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, up there in Minnesota, they had a lot of high hopes for their playoffs and maybe even a Super Bowl run. But I don't think a lot of it had to do too much with the fantasy football value of Teddy Bridgewater. I think in a bucket, in a vacuum, I think Bridgewater as a fantasy quarterback was on the back end. So not a lot of people were looking at him. If you look at our composite rankings, he was outside the top 25. Now, with that said, people were looking at Stephon Diggs. People were looking at Charles Johnson. They wanted to know what to make of Laquan Treadwell, the rookie. Now those guys, all hands are off, because right now it's looking like Sean Hill unless they make a trade, and I would probably pump the brakes on that real quick because Sean Hill might go down as one of the worst fantasy quarterbacks in recent memory. Now out of the backfield, Adrian Peterson cements himself as a top 5 running back, and then it opens up the door for like a guy like Jerick McKinnon. I think they're going to have to get creative with the way that they move the chains, if they move the chains, and maybe a change of pace back like a Jerick McKinnon has even more value there at the back end of drafts. Tony Romo, here we go again, right? And I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I thought they were going to finish that statue of Dak Prescott before the preseason even ended, and now he gets elevated. Again, you're only one play away from being a starting quarterback in this league, and now the rookie Dak Prescott becomes a little bit valuable in 2 quarterback sets. I think you can't ignore the preseason. I think he looks sharp. He was also playing some vanilla defenses, so you have to consider that. A lot of people on Twitter and on social media are concerned about Dez Bryant's value with Dak there. I mean, it's not going to be him and Tony Romo. As we've learned in the past, when Romo's off the field, Dez hasn't been as good, but it's an unknown commodity. It's Dak Prescott. What this does, though, Ezekiel Elliott running behind that offensive line in Dallas, it's going to be a lot of great work for him. I think Alfred Morris even gets a little bit of boost of value there as his handcuff, because until we see Dak against regular season defenses, regular season speeds, I don't know how much we really know. I think he looks sharp in the preseason, but there's a lot of what-ifs around him right now.
So injury is something that impacts, I mean, obviously, if you already had your draft and you happen to have those guys, of course. Now, what do you do if Bridgewater was your guy?
Yeah, I mean, you could go out on the waiver wire, and there are plenty of guys at the back end of the draft that I know have gone undrafted. The first name that keeps coming to mind is Ryan Fitzpatrick. You know, he had that long holdout. He finally got a deal done with the Jets, and he's got Brandon Marshall, and he's got Eric Decker. So if the quarterback crop is really picked over, look at Fitzpatrick. I know he's the Harvard guy. He's got the weird beard and all of this, but Fitzpatrick put up some decent fantasy numbers in the past. That's where I would look first for either Tony Romo or Teddy Bridgewater. I think Fitzpatrick is where it begins and ends. If Jameis Winston's out there, that's another guy that I like a lot as somebody that might be a hedge. A lot of people started drafting him here over the last week, or at least as a backup, so he might be gone. And then Tyrod Taylor is a guy that I really like. I know his stock has went up over the last month because he's that mobile quarterback that should get you points with the rush, with the pass. Those are some guys I would keep an eye on.
And for those who have not drafted yet, we hear about Bridgewater and Romo, of course, the big name guys. Is there any other injuries maybe hampering some guys that someone would maybe not pay attention to and then accidentally take?
Ben Watson was the guy that I was keeping an eye on in Baltimore as a tight end. Ben Watson had a crazy year last year in New Orleans, and granted, maybe he was a byproduct of the offense that the Saints run, but he goes to Baltimore, another offense that likes to work the tight end into the scheme, and now he's out for the year, so that's a guy that you can take off the board. The Pittsburgh Steelers put Ladarius Green on the PUP list. He's got an ankle injury that he wasn't quite ready for week 1, so that's another guy that was up draft boards when he got signed by the Steelers, and now we kind of have to play the wait-and-see game. But plenty of good tight ends to choose from out there on the draft boards.
So the Browns' third preseason game, we see a little bit of Josh Gordon, and we obviously know he's suspended for 4 games, but will be back, and we're hoping he'll be in that form again. There was a lot of people asking, when do we take him? When do I, draft and stash these guys? You talk about a Tom Brady, a Le'Veon Bell. We know they're not going to play right away, but how do you approach that when you see a guy that could be really good, like Josh Gordon, what we saw in the third preseason game?
Yeah, I'm buying a lot of shares of Josh Gordon right now, and I'm probably going to even overpay a little bit and go into the 5th round. I think he's going to shake out late 5th, early 6th. I mean, I got to call a spade a spade. When you look at that Browns defense, they're going to be playing from behind in the second half. And when you look back at what Josh Gordon did just a few years ago, he made his fantasy money in garbage time. So I just think you have to kind of keep an eye on that as far as Josh Gordon in the 5th round. It makes a lot of sense.
So last year, this year, breakout players, maybe some last year guys that didn't do so great, but are they coming around? Who is your breakout players this season?
Yeah, I really like Dante Moncrief there in Indianapolis. They tried the Andre Johnson experiment there with Indy last year. It didn't work out, and now you got Andrew Luck there with T.Y. Hilton, who has been a constant in fantasy circles. But I really think Dante Moncrief takes another step this year. Out in Arizona, I really like Michael Floyd, the former Notre Dame product, and now he's getting into his 3rd, 4th year now, and it's one of those things where he got a slow start to the season last year. When the season started, he was dealing with a hand injury, and then you look at his December numbers, they were through the roof. So I think Carson Palmer, he's going to find Larry Fitzgerald, but there's also a lot of reason to be excited about Michael Floyd. Plus, John Brown, one of their other receivers, is dealing with some concussions heading into this final week before the season starts, something to keep in mind. And then the other name that I like, and it might not be so much of a breakout as can he stay healthy, is Sammy Watkins. I know Sammy Watkins could be in Cleveland right now had they not traded down or traded picks with Buffalo. And now he's coming off a couple injuries, but when him and Tyrod Taylor were on the field, and this is why I like Tyrod Taylor so much, him and Sammy Watkins did a lot of great work in November and December last year. You give me 16 games of Sammy Watkins, you're going to be really happy.
What about on the other side of that, guys that did pretty good last year and you don't think it's going to go so hot this season?
Well, I think you have to start looking at the guys that are a little bit older. I mean, a lot of people are fading Frank Gore. I have not seen Frank Gore this far down on a draft board in his entire career. So I think Indianapolis's running back situation is one of those places where I'm just completely avoiding it altogether. Another name, and this is kind of crazy because everybody's so big on Julio Jones. They're not so big on Matt Ryan. I just did a mock draft a couple hours ago. Matt Ryan wasn't picked until after the 10th round. So this is a guy, just a few years ago, he was a Heisman candidate when he was at Boston College, and then he comes into the league. He's got Roddy White, he's got Julio Jones. Well, now he has Julio Jones, and he has Mohamed Sanu, and he has Devonta Freeman. But not many people buying stock of Matt Ryan these days, which is, 10th round or not, the guy's still a decent quarterback. I don't know if he's a guy that I would draft, but after the 10th round does seem a little low for so many people being pumped up about Julio Jones.
Last week, and we've really talked about the combos of the quarterback and the receivers. Maybe, not drafting yet, some of those key combos and even tight end, quarterback. Who's your top combos in that?
Yeah, Ben Roethlisberger to Antonio Brown is going to be the top one. I mentioned Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think Fitzpatrick and Brandon Marshall will surprise a lot of people this year. But that's another one. And then you go to Green Bay, and there's a lot to like there with Aaron Rodgers. I think Aaron Rodgers could finish with the most fantasy points among quarterbacks this year. Cam Newton did it last year. But if him and Jordy pick up where they left off, Jordy missed all of last year with the knee injury, I think you're going to be really, really pleasantly happy just the way that getting Jordy Nelson back allows Aaron Rodgers to target him. It allows him to target Randall Cobb, who was double covered last year because he had a bunch of inexperienced receivers around him. And then they also signed Jared Cook in the offseason. So Jared Cook is this tight end that has kind of floundered around with St. Louis because they really haven't been able to get a quarterback that makes him better. Now he's up there in Green Bay, and with Rodgers, I think that there's a lot to like there. The tandem to like is up there, I believe, in Green Bay.
Ryan Fowler of FoxSports.com joining us, our fantasy football expert. Before we get to some of the fans' questions today, some bench players and how you approach that when you go through the draft as well.
Yeah, I get a little creative there in the 9th through 12th, 13th rounds. I think that's where you could take some flyers on some young names. Right now, I've done a couple drafts over the last 72 hours, and Tajay Sharp down there in Tennessee is a guy that's been on every one of my rosters. Tajay Sharp could be one of those guys in PPR leagues, points per reception, that really starts hot and finishes hot. It's not one of those things where he goes through any type of rookie swoon. And you remember the Tennessee Titans, they traded Dorial Green-Beckham to the Philadelphia Eagles to make room because they were probably so happy with Sharp, and he has looked really impressive this preseason as far as the amount of targets he's getting, catching the ball, finding the end zone. That's one name that jumps off the board. And then when you go down to San Diego, they just cut James Jones yesterday. They got a young kid named Tyrell over there that might become their wide receiver 3. They have Travis Benjamin. They have Keenan Allen, of course. Antonio Gates is going to go out there for what seems like the 20th year. But Tyrell, I think he could be one of those guys that maybe he's like a Malcolm Floyd earlier on in his career, a big body that can go down and get the ball. And then one name to round it out, I think later in drafts, Bilal Powell of the New York Jets could supplant Matt Forte should he go down with injury. I think Bilal Powell finished 2015 quite strong. And again, his draft stock is on the rise. I think in the 10th, 11th round is where I would target Powell.
We have a few questions from the fans, and you can follow Ryan at Fox Sports Fowler. And first one is from Tyler Demet. He says, do you like Carlos Hyde this year?
I do like Carlos Hyde. The guy that makes me nervous is not so much Carlos Hyde, but it's Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly in Philadelphia didn't really do a lot of favors for fantasy owners with LaShawn McCoy, with DeMarco Murray. And then when Murray was there, it was Murray, it was Matthews, and it was Darren Sproles. You really didn't know what you were going to get. Now, Carlos Hyde, would have loved to see a little bit more of him in 2015 to make a better and more educated analysis on him. I like him. I'm just not going out of my way to overvalue him because Chip Kelly and that whole organization right now, to be honest, makes me a little nervous.
Bill's wondering about the running backs in New England with Brady being out. What is that going to change there, and who do you got there?
I laugh because it's a very popular question. Here's the deal. Dion Lewis probably going to get back week 8 to week 10, somewhere in there. I picked him up. I have an IR spot. I stashed him on an IR because I don't think anybody's going to break through as the lead back the first half of the season. With that said, maybe your strategy is you just completely fade LeGarrette Blount or James White and just kind of wait and find a different scenario. I mentioned Bilal Powell. When you're looking at LeGarrette Blount and you're looking at James White, Bilal Powell's probably there. Kristen Michael up there in Seattle as he's trying to get some reps taken away from Thomas Rawls. As you can tell, I'm not really committed to LeGarrette Blount this year. I think if there was anybody, though, that would come off the board first, I think LeGarrette Blount. He has shown in the past they can have these monster games. The problem is Bill Belichick, he's not going to commit to one running back week after week. It's just not going to happen.
Michael Thomas asking Aaron Rodgers a good pick in the first round.
Depends on the scoring system. I mean, if you're doing a 2-quarterback league, the short answer is yes. If you're doing just start one quarterback each week, the answer is no. I think Aaron Rodgers, end of the second, early third would be the earliest that I would take him, but my strategy all along has been to wait, and I've been pleasantly rewarded where it hasn't gotten out of control. One name that keeps falling down draft boards is Blake Bortles down there in Jacksonville. I think what happened was a lot of his fantasy points scored last year were in garbage time, so people started to think, okay, he's peaking at round 3 draft value in 2016. That doesn't make any sense if the quote-unquote Jaguars are, well, I should say quote-unquote improved. And they brought in Chris Ivory to finish off drives, whereas last year Bortles was passing to Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns. I think you can get Blake Bortles for pretty good value and wait a few more rounds.
Last one comes from Josh Foster. How do you feel about Travis Kelce? Where should I take him?
Travis Kelce and I have an interesting fantasy relationship, and I'm dead serious when I say this. John Halpin's my colleague down there in Charlotte, North Carolina. John and I have had this conversation about Travis Kelce for 3 years now. I'm waiting for him to break out. Travis Kelce with Andy Reid, it just isn't clicking. I know you look at the end-all numbers, and they look okay. And I think it's lipstick on a pig, honestly. I think when you look at the week-to-week fantasy production of Travis Kelce, he'll get you a great game here, and then you might have to wait 5 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. There's not that constant and consistent production because it's not that Kelce is not talented. It's that Andy Reid, he moves all these pieces around. They want to win kind of ugly. We always talk about Alex Smith as the game manager, and that's a negative on Travis Kelce. I just can't really buy him. Will he finish as a top 10 tight end? He may, but some of those point totals won't help you week to week.
He's also very busy with his dating show, too, so you got to put that into it, right, Ryan?
That's a great, wow, look at you, a little pop culture on the side. Travis Kelce does have some off-the-field hobbies, no question.
Thanks so much, and you can continue to write in at Fox Sports Fowler. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week right here on Drennan Live. Thanks, Ryan.
Take care.
Stick around, more Drennan Live coming your way right after the break here on Sportstime Ohio.